Chapter 94, The Divine Decree No. 20 years ago, Xiao Yan and the two families were in-laws. However, with the tragic death of the child who was less than 7 years old during the siege of Beijing by King Pingnan, the fragile bond connected by the in-laws easily broke down. Xiao Yuan has been sitting in the position of Dingguo Gong for more than 20 years. When the old Dingguo Gong had 3 sons-in-law under his knees, Dingguo Gong's position was not inherited by him this time. However, the whole capital knew that he was lucky, and the eldest brother who was supposed to be the prince of the world fell seriously ill and burned into a fool. When the Kuagong mansion was hesitating who to appoint, he didn't know each other with Yan Mu, who was the new successor to the position of Marquis Yanji, in the school field, and then married Yan Mu's sister Yan Min as his wife, which easily reversed the disadvantage in the inner house, and got both a dignified and capable wife and the support of her mother's family. Soon, the old Dingguo Gong asked for him to be crowned and made the prince. After the death of the old Dingguo Gong, Xiao Yuan became the grandfather of the country justifiably. Xiao Dingfei is his only sister-in-law with Yan Min. This child is smart and clever, and has the blood of Xiao Yan and the 2 clans at the same time. It can be said that he was born with the attention of the entire capital, and was appointed by the saint to be the son of the world at the age of 5. But Xiao Yuan didn't like this child. Especially after the battle of King Pingnan, whenever you hear anyone mention this name again, you can't help but sink your face, and even turn your face with others. Because Yan Min actually reconciled with him after this incident. The Yanji Marquis mansion is a recent generation, relying on meritorious service on the battlefield, to slowly accumulate enough meritorious deeds, and has today's status. Before Xiao Yuan, there had never been a grandfather who had reconciled with his wife. For men, there has always been only a divorce of their wives, and reconciliation is a great shame. Women's Taoist families, long hair and short knowledge. Where do you know the severity of the court? Xiao Yuan had the heart not to let go of his wife, but Yan Min had the support of the Ho mansion behind him, and the royal family was also ashamed of the Yan family. After being admonished by the Empress Dowager Xiao, he finally wrote a letter to release his wife and separated from Yan Min. But since then, Xiao Yan's 2 families have cut off contact. 20 years have passed, and Xiao Yan has never set foot in the Yanji Marquis mansion again. Today, for the first time in 20 years, the soldiers with heavy armor and swords in their hands all followed behind him, and the holy decree written by the Holy Lord himself from the ninefold palace was held in his hands, and all the anger and grievances he had suffered in the past were freely vented at this moment. Xiao Yuan went up the steps. His hair was already gray. He was wearing deep clothes, upturned shoes, and a high crown hat on his head, and after entering the hall, his footsteps stopped, and he swept over the faces of everyone present with a somewhat dangerous gaze, and frowned when he saw Xie Wei, who was still crowning Yan Lin, and finally looked at Yan Mu who had stood up next to him. Yan Mu's face was already low and frozen. I have been dedicated to my duties for generations, loyal to the monarch and loving the people. What does the Duke of Dingguo mean? Xiao Yuan sneered. Of course, it is all the meaning of the saint. An hour ago, news came from Tongzhou, someone secretly instigated, and the 50,000 troops stationed in the camp made a mutiny, claiming that they wanted to seek justice for your Yanji Marquis mansion. Yan Mu, when the king of Pingnan fought against you, I were also deeply affected. But I didn't expect you to dare to secretly contact the rebellious party, and the saint was benevolent and righteous to spare your family for the death penalty. Who would have dared to try to rebel? Your time of death can be regarded as coming. Tongzhou Battalion, mutiny in the army. Which of the people present was not mixed in the court? Fang Yao had a guess when he heard Xiao Yuan say the word mutiny, and now when he heard him say it in detail, he felt that the cold hairs on his back stood up, and they couldn't help but turn their heads to look at Yan Mu. Yan Mu was also stunned when he heard about the Tongzhou camp mutiny, but then when he heard the sentence "You and I are also deeply affected," the sadness in his heart suddenly turned into boundless anger. He slammed the table next to him. All the teacups on the table were shocked and fell to the ground, smashed to pieces. Yan Mu looked at Xiao Yuan with round eyes, his eyes were almost bloodshot, and he only asked with hatred word by word, "Do you dare to say that your Xiao clan is deeply affected by the Battle of King Pingnan?" In the huge vestibule, not even the sound of gasping could be heard. On the one hand, the holy decree has arrived, and the death of the Marquis of Yanji is imminent, and on the other hand, the two masters of the two clans, who were once prominent in Beijing, are facing each other in the court, and the swords are tense. Some of the companions who are a little less timid today have long been frightened. Even Zhang Xuning felt that his neck was stuck by someone's palm. It's one thing to know, it's another to experience it. After all, the young man's crown ceremony still couldn't avoid being stained with blood, and a cloud of family annihilation was shrouded. For a moment, Yan Lin was about to stand up, stand by his father's side, and face with him the cruel and unknown fate that overturned today. However, Xie Wei in front of him just stretched out his hand to the side again. Where have the admirers seen such a scene today? Holding the lacquer plate next to him, his legs were so frightened that he almost knelt down. After Xie Wei stretched out his hand, no one handed anything for a long time, so he lifted his eyes and said softly, "Hairpin." It was a quiet moment in the hall, and no one dared to speak, and a string in his head was tightly tensed, just afraid that something was about to happen. When Xie Wei's sound sounded flat, no one expected it, some people's eyebrows trembled, and the soldiers who pressed the handle of the knife in their hands almost pulled out their knives and were about to make a move, but when they turned their heads, it was Xie Wei. None of the likers reacted. Until Xie Wei frowned slightly, and repeated, "Hairpin." The jade crown that tied the hair was matched with a pair of wooden hairpins, which were only inserted on the left side, but there was still one side. Who would have thought that this knife was hanging in the back of the neck, and he was still thinking about the crowning. Only then did the praiser take the wooden hairpin and hand it to Xie Wei almost sluggishly. Xie Wei didn't even look at others, holding the wooden hairpin and inserting it into the jade crown that tied his hair. Dingguo Gong Xiao Yuan's gaze also fell on him at this time, and his frowning brows unconsciously frowned tighter, although he knew that this Mr. Xie was a close minister of the Son of Heaven, born in the Xie clan of Jinling, and was a very capable person, but this unfazed appearance did not put everyone in their eyes. He didn't even bother to talk nonsense with these guys anymore. In Xiao Yuan's opinion, the gang of people in the Yanji Marquis mansion are no different from dead people, so he waved his hand directly and said coldly, "Don't talk nonsense, all the adults who went to the banquet today please don't move, all the Yan clan's henchmen will be arrested for me." Yes. And all the soldiers behind him were to press forward. However, I didn't expect a voice to suddenly come out of the oblique thorn and ask, "Dakian law, the holy decree should be read for the person who receives the decree, and since the grandfather of the country has come with the holy decree, why don't you start taking people without reading the holy decree?" Xiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. According to the law, there is such a thing, but the holy decree from the palace, does he dare to falsely pass the holy decree? There was a bit of solemnity in his eyes. He followed the prestige, and it turned out to be a tall and thin young man standing at the end of the crowd, wearing a navy blue robe, and he was not dressed, so he didn't know what kind of official product it was, but he guessed that the position was not high, and he looked cold and bland, and he felt that his eyes were angry, so he said coldly, "Who are you?" The man put both hands in the wide sleeves of his coat and hung them down, but he was plain and not nervous, and only said, "The head of the Qing officials division of the lower officials and criminal department, Zhang Shat." Zhang Shat. As soon as he said this name, Xiao Yuan had an impression, and remembered that it was the former criminal department who was quite controversial in the court a while ago, and he was a difficult official. The holy decree was held in Xiao Yuan's hands. Now that everyone is watching, even if he feels that he can't hold it on his face, he doesn't dare to openly refuse to read the holy decree. Left and right is the recitation of a holy decree. At this time, Xiao Yuan didn't think much about it, sneered, and then thanked Zhang Xia for reminding, showing the holy decree. Feng Tian carries the emperor's edict and read it, to the effect that it is exactly the same as what he said when he just entered the palace. One is a big mutiny in the army, and the other is colluding with the king of Pingnan to rebel against the party. After achieving this, Xiao Yuan suddenly closed the holy decree and said gloomily, "This holy decree has been read, you should believe it, right? Grandpa Guo, Marquis Yanji hasn't received the order yet." Zhang Xia watched from the side, and saw that he was about to order someone to be arrested, and his eyelids were matched, and he added another sentence without being salty or light. This time, not to mention Xiao Yuan, the Duke of Dingguo, who was in charge of transmitting the decree, but also the brave and resolute Hou Yanmu, who had already accepted the fate of the catastrophe in his heart, couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded, and couldn't understand what this adult surnamed Zhang wanted to do. Xie Wei raised his eyebrows when he heard the word Zhang Xia. The crowning was completed. Yan Lin stood up and waved at Xie Wei again, and turned his head to look. Xie Wei's gaze fell quietly on Zhang Xia's face, and he didn't speak. Xiao Yuan almost didn't choke to death by the sentence. His face was blue and red, his teeth were bitten, and he only said, "Don't you know, I still use you to remind you." Then he handed the holy decree forward and said, "Yan Jiho came up to receive the decree." Yan Mu came forward to accept the order, but when he looked at Zhang Xia, he also felt that he was angry, thinking that the whole mansion should not have such a friend, and he didn't know what medicine was sold in the other party's gourd. Xiao Yuan expected that the matter should be settled here, and this surnamed Zhang should have no thorns to pick, so he waved his hand again to replace someone to arrest him. However, this time, before he could speak, his eyelids jumped. Because he actually saw this surnamed Zhang walking towards Yan Mu, he stretched out the hand that he had held in his sleeve before, as if he wanted to ask Yan Mu to see the holy decree, but his face turned to his side and asked, "Dare to ask Grandpa Guo, just said that the news of the mutiny in the Tongzhou camp came an hour ago, and the Holy Lord issued a holy decree to copy the whole mansion. What the hell is this man trying to do?" Xiao Yuan had the sword at his waist, and at this time, he was already holding the hilt of the sword a little uncontrollably, and replied coldly, "Exactly." Zhang Xia said to Yan Mu, "Please take a look at the holy decree." Xiao Yuan was a little angry. "What do you want when you get an axe from a humble and petty official?" Yan Mu's eyes rolled, but he directly handed over the holy decree. Zhang Xia took it, his long fingers with distinct bones gently spread it, and he only said, "Grandpa Guo's anger, it is a big crime to raid the family and destroy the clan, according to the law is the meaning of the saint, and the decrees at all levels should also be approved and stamped by the Zhongsha province before they can be issued. Xiaoguan heard yesterday that Lord Chu Ziyai of Zhongsha province was sick, and the news of the mutiny in Tongzhou came only an hour ago, and it would take some time to invite Lord Chu to enter the palace. It's..." By this time, his gaze had fallen on this holy decree. The secret I heard from Gu Chunfang in the previous life was really true. The holy decree of the seizure of the Yanji Marquis mansion was indeed written by Shen Lang himself, but when the decree was announced, it was actually only stamped with the emperor's treasure seal, and there was no seal of the Zhongsha province. Later, the holy decree that appeared in the file of the Yanji Marquis mansion case was complete with 2 seals, and it is rumored that after the Haufu was confiscated and half of the people in the whole mansion were slaughtered, the new governor of Zhongsha province was stamped with the seal of the Zhongsha province. However, the former governor of Pingjiang, Chu Ziyai, was dismissed, returned to his hometown due to old illness, and died at home due to poverty and illness within half a year. The colleagues who went to mourn were the only ones who went to mourn. Only then did I know about this matter, and it was roughly deduced that Chu Ziyai's official to the governor of Zhongsha province Pingjiang was tantamount to a Zaifu, How could he end up like this? Zhongsha's gaze moved away from the blank space that should have been covered with the Great Seal of Zhongsha Province, and fell back on Xiao Yuan's face, and only said, "Grandpa Guo's holy decree, I'm afraid I can't announce it, I can't count it." Xiao Yuan couldn't bear it anymore, and drew his sword and pointed it directly at his throat. The anger between the words was already uncontrollable. "How dare you talk nonsense? The decree of the Holy Lord's letter is up to you to put your beak." Zhang Xuning never expected Zhongsha to stand up, and he also said such a thing one after another. "The laws and regulations of the great Jianchao are true and not fake, but I don't know what the situation is today in the previous life." Her heart suddenly jumped in her chest, and she almost jumped out of her throat. Chen Ying quietly stayed away from Zhongsha when he just spoke. However, Zhongsha himself was extremely calm. He stretched out his hand and handed the holy decree back. The cold light flashing sword blade reflected his bleak and cold face. There was no sadness or joy, so he had to persuade him, and said, "It doesn't matter if the prince of the country kills the lower official in anger, the holy decree still has to be sent back to the palace, and the Zhongsha province is asked to stamp the big seal before it can be issued." The holy decree has been delivered, and the soldiers have already surrounded the house, and this person actually said that what the emperor said is not counted, and he has to send it back to make a seal and then come back to raid the house. How can this be justified? How can this be justified? Xiao Yuan had never encountered such a bizarre thing in the past 50 years, and he was almost angry that one Buddha went out of the body and 2 Buddhas ascended to heaven. Smoke came out of the 5 holes and 7 orifices, and he couldn't even say a complete sentence, and his hands trembled. You.